going ahead with Zoom. And the good thing about that is it's enabled some of you to come from more far distant places. So it is a great joy to be here, and I'm really grateful for the invitation and looking forward to the conversation. As Penny said, our theme is a contemplative life in the time of COVID, and with particular reference to the city of Sydney, although, as we've already said, acknowledging that there are people here from further afield. And so I hope that this sounds relevant to you wherever you are. But the question that Penny and Kate posed to me was, what might contemplative practice have to offer the city of Sydney in these times? I think it's a wonderful question to be holding and exploring. And I guess my hope for this afternoon is that we can continue to hold and explore it in a contemplative way. So in a spirit of listening and receptivity, listening to our own spirit, waiting on the Spirit of God, and making ourselves available to be led a bit deeper into the question itself, into the heart of things, as well as into awareness of our place and of the opportunities that perhaps are before us in whatever place we are. And so I'm inviting you to be here, not so much in a problem solving or a action planning kind of way, but in this kind of listening, contemplative, waiting on the Spirit kind of way. So I'd like us to begin with a couple of minutes of silence. Many of you perhaps have had a bit of a rush to get here, to be ready at this time. So just a couple of minutes of silence to let ourselves arrive and to become interiorly settled and still. And present, perhaps, or just aware that something has drawn us here. I invite you to be present to your breathing, to your body. As we gather, we remember the land on which we meet, and we acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. Those of you in Sydney, we acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Here in Canberra, I acknowledge the Ngunnawal people. And wherever you are, I invite you to bring to mind the traditional custodians of the land you are on. Honouring the way First Nations people's connection to land nurtured body, mind and spirit. Open to learning from that wisdom and yearning for that deepened connection. And we acknowledge too the complex and manifold life of the places we are. Again, I'll focus on Sydney, but you might apply this to your context. And just let us get present to the different peoples, the traditions, the geographies that make up the city. Think of the histories and languages present here, and the range of people's experience and life situations. Those who live with vast wealth and those with great poverty, material poverty anyway. Think of the stories of hidden trauma, of aspiration and of hope. Think of those with too much work and those with none. Those who are isolated in this vast metropolis, while others have a deep sense of belonging. And in all this manifold complexity in life, we're aware of our own and others' need for release from demons of anxiety, compulsive activity, acquisitiveness, competitiveness, negative self-talk, and the ways we constantly compare ourselves with others. These are some of the realities in which we are seeking to engage our question and be available for what might be called forth from us. So let me just say before I get into a little set of reflections, just to let you know a little bit more of the shape of the afternoon. So I'm going to offer some reflections for about 25-30 minutes. And then there'll be an invitation to join in small breakout rooms for a small group conversation with each other. And then we'll have time, 30 minutes or so, for whole group discussion and reflection on what's arising. So hopefully that'll be a balance that enables you to engage with the question as you are led to do so. So, as I said, Penny and Kate asked if I'd share something about contemplative practice and what is offered by a contemplative approach to life, and particularly from my own experience. I know that many of you are familiar with the way of contemplation, but perhaps not everyone. So I thought I'd start with a few introductory remarks. One of my favourite definitions of contemplation is that it's a long, loving look at the real. It involves the willingness and the capacity to let be and to be present as openly and simply, as honestly and non-anxiously as we can to what is. And there's a range of disciplines and activities that help us grow in our capacity to be present in this way, all of which we might describe as contemplative practice. I'm sure they're well known to many of you. They include bodily practices, such things as mindful movement, like yoga or Tai Chi, dance, walking mindfully in nature, or breathing. There are creative practices, photography, calligraphy, painting, mandala work. There are ceremonial or ritual practices. You might think of the tea ceremony or certain kinds of sacramental action. And other practices like practicing gratitude, practicing compassion, reflective reading or writing, journaling, and indeed anything that's done attentively and wholeheartedly with awareness and for nothing. That is not because we're trying to get somewhere or win something, but for its own sake, is a form of contemplative practice. Parenting, gardening, grandparenting. When they're done in this spirit of wholehearted presence and attention, all these practices awaken us and attune us to reality beyond the self-centeredness and inattention that is our default condition. So they're kind of like they collect us and then open us out beyond ourselves. And ultimately, of course, in the faith context, we might say they attune us, they open us to the reality of God. Like Moses, whose willingness to stop what he was doing, to turn aside to see, was the condition of him recognizing God present in the burning bush. God who self-identifies as I am, sheer being. And it seems to me that at the heart of any and all of these truly contemplative practices is silence. What the poet R.S. Thomas called the silence of the mind. This silence isn't just about the absence of physical noise. It's about freedom from our inner chatter and agitation. It's about being in a state of rest or deep quiet, deep stillness. If we're going to be fully present and receptive to the reality of things, our bodies, our tea ceremony, our children, our neighbour, to anything at all, then we need to be able to let go of whatever else is preoccupying, distracting, and agitating us at any given moment, so as to be able to give our whole attention. And first and foremost, this means learning how to let go of thoughts and our self-referencing habits of mind. Ideas, plans, worries, demands, obsessive mental tics, being able to choose to let go of those things in order to be fully here and now. Doesn't mean we don't come back to our plan, we don't come back to our worry, but it means we're not compulsed by them. We have the capacity to choose to let them go so as to be more fully present. So contemplation is intrinsically connected to this movement of self-forgetfulness or self-emptying, kenosis. And this is why a regular practice of silent meditation, the letting go of thoughts, is a foundational or even the foundational contemplative practice. Meditation is not an end in itself, but it is a kind of discipline or training that leads to contemplation, which is the silent beholding of the real. Now, for many who've spent time in and around the church, the idea that this practice of silent meditation is a form of prayer seems initially counterintuitive. Both Hebrew and Christian scriptures testify to a God who speaks, a God who reveals God's self in word and deed, through events and persons, commandment and summons. The experience of dialogue with God seems pervasive in our tradition, from the prophets being given and then communicating the word of the Lord through practices of vocal prayer, whether of lament, petition, or praise. One of E.M. Forster's characters in A Passage to India spoke of poor little talkative Christianity. And it's not hard to see how we got so chatty. But in the practice of meditation, we're taught to lay aside all our words and images, not only the plans and anxieties that so often preoccupy us, but even our words addressed to God, images and ideas of God that come direct from Scripture. And like I said, it can seem radically counterintuitive. How is not talking to God, not even thinking about God, a form of prayer? How is it an expression of faithfulness, let alone of discipleship? The fundamental contemplative insight is that God is always more than we can think or imagine. God is not an object of our awareness, but the ground of our awareness itself. And true knowledge and love of God means going past the idolatrous images we tend to create. And you'll remember that the Hebrew scriptures are full of anxiety about idolatry. Is to get past those in order to awaken to a deeper perception of and communion with the real. Be still and know that I am God. So if this is what we mean in a, very short summary version by contemplation or the contemplative life, what is its significance in these COVID times? And what does it offer? What could it offer the city of Sydney or any of the places we are? At one level, it seems to me that contemplation matters whatever the time and place, because it addresses something essential for the human condition. So whether we're at peace or at war, in time of prosperity or time of pandemic, in the bush or the city, if we want to live connected to and tuned into the heart of reality, then contemplative practice is necessary. And all those of you who meditate know the profound difference it makes to our relationship to ourselves, to the quality of our responsiveness, how it makes us less reactive, less threatened, less defensive, which means that the quality of our listening, the quality of our discernment, the quality of our action is deepened. It helps us to be more at home with unresolvedness, with things being unclear or provisional, as well as with risking action in the face of the unknown. And all of that is pretty handy in COVID times. And that's because through this practice over time, more and more we discover that our identity is grounded not in being right or successful, but trustingly in a reality that is being given. As we say in the Christian tradition, in God. And as that happens, as we ourselves are more securely sourced in that reality, we start to become a space where grace has a chance of breaking through. We become a hospitality, a listening. And this goes for contemplative communities as well as individuals. Of course, as I know all too well, it doesn't mean we spend our whole life in a state of Zen-like calm. But we're aware, even when we're caught up in it, of the ultimate unreality of so much of what causes us to be stressed or anxious or unhappy or driven. And at the level of a church or a community, this underlying awareness makes a huge difference to the culture of a place. People feel it when they encounter it. Some of you will be familiar with Rowan Williams' words about the significance of contemplation for our time, where he speaks about it being the only ultimate answer to the unreal and insane world that our financial systems and our advertising culture and our chaotic and unexamined emotions encourage us to inhabit. And so he says to learn contemplative practice is to learn what we need so as to live truthfully and honestly and lovingly. It is, he says, a deeply revolutionary matter. And speaking of the significance of contemplation as intrinsic to the church's service to the world, he says that unless the church can open the door to this possibility of living more humanly, living with less frantic acquisitiveness, living with space for stillness, living in the expectation of learning, and most of all, living with an awareness that there is a solid and durable joy to be discovered in the disciplines of self-forgetfulness. Unless it can do all this, then our churches will run the risk of trying to sustain faith on the basis of an untransformed set of human habits, with the all too familiar result that the church comes to look, he says, unhappily like so many purely human institutions, anxious, busy, competitive, and controlling. So you might be hearing anew or hearing again how in times like ours, which are unsettled and anxious and provisional, there is a stability that contemplative practice and communities of contemplative practice can bring into the larger life of a place. There's the possibility of offering a place of rest and of strength and of deeper connectedness. As Penny said, and as you know, in Canberra, I lead Benedictus Contemplative Church. And this practice of silent meditation, this attempt to live out of the contemplative spirit in everything we do, is starting to shape our common life in particular kinds of ways. So I wanted to finish my remarks here with 3 brief examples from our experience that might help us in this conversation reflect on what contemplative practice, what becoming a more contemplative community might offer the city of Sydney and beyond in these times. I'm only touching on these things, but I hope it's enough just to give you a taste, and then those are things we can continue to explore in the question time at the end if you would like to. So 3 examples from Benedictus. One is our experience of offering daily meditation online. I'd always wanted to offer an evening meditation at Benedictus, but we hadn't started it. And the question of people getting across town at the end of the working day or when they needed to get home to start getting dinner always felt problematic. And I imagine in a place the size of Sydney, that's multiplied exponentially. How do you encourage people to come drop in for a 5:30 meditation in a context like that? Certainly didn't want to create anything that made people's lives busier. So when COVID hit, first of all, it was just before Easter in 2020. And we decided to offer during Holy Week daily meditation at 5:30 on Zoom. And I'm aware that perhaps this is already happening in some of the places that you are as well. People came during that Holy Week period and they loved it. And they wondered if we could keep going after Easter. So we thought we'd continue for a while and see what happened. Initially, we had about 15 people joining, and I led the meditation every night. Fast forward to early 2022, and we have between 60 and 70, sometimes up to 80 connections every night. And I only lead once a fortnight. So it's taken on a life of its own. It's helped people establish a regular practice. Often that second meditation of the day is the hard one to get in. For many of the people who come who live alone, and especially during lockdown, it bridged that difficult twilight time when aloneness can feel particularly acute. And it has become a genuine community. It might seem strange. You might think people are just popping in to get what they get and then leaving again. But as John Main always says, meditation creates community. And we recently had a very strong highlighting of this. One of the regular online meditators was someone who had come a few times to Benedictus in person, but then stopped coming. And none of us really knew him. But towards the end of last year, after months of attending, he sent me a chat to say that he'd been diagnosed with motor neurone disease early last year and was now in palliative care. But that the daily online meditation had been profoundly significant for him during this time. As he lost his capacity to speak and move, his inner journey had been enabled by this practice of shared silence and stillness, in which he was able to participate as fully as anyone else. And he wondered if he was at the point now towards the end of his life where he actually wanted now to realize that sense of community and to meet with a couple of people who he had felt a real connection with and to meditate with them. And all of us were able to visit either in person or on Zoom before he died. But it was one of those extraordinary things of offering something. You have no idea that you offered it, that it's meant what it's meant to a particular person. But it was that kind of capacity to share in the silence from whatever situation that was really significant. The second kind of example from our experience has been our Kaleidoscope quiet afternoons for primary aged children. These have been going for about 8 years now, and they're created and led by a member of Benedictus. Kaleidoscope is about nurturing the contemplative heart of primary aged children while simultaneously giving space into the life of families. So this, I think, is an interesting thing to think about in terms of contemplative ministry. Often we think of ministry in terms of putting things on that people come to and are nourished by, and that's clearly part of it. But you might also start to think about what's the kind of the reverse of that, which is how does a contemplative community enable space in the life that people already have? Kaleidoscope does both those things. The children come and are nurtured by the space, but the parents are given 2.5 hours on a Sunday afternoon where they can themselves be nurtured, not by coming out to an event, but by having some space inserted in their life. Around 35 families are connected to Kaleidoscope, with up to 25 children attending on any given afternoon. And the afternoons involve a gathering circle, a brief time of meditation, introduction to a theme like kindness or hope or sky or breath. And then there are stories and craft activities, all very unhurried, lots of time and space for the children to move between things as they would like to, that help children engage with the theme. So rather than focus, as traditional Sunday schools tended to do, on giving children input about faith, the focus here is on cultivating capacities for paying attention, for listening to themselves and to others and to the earth, and which enables them to touch into the experience of peace and presence of God, which is something we know will serve them throughout their lives, whatever their faith journey goes on to be. And then the third piece from our experience that just to share with you is our commitment to enabling spaces for reflection, self-reflection, reflective practice, and conversation. So in a similar vein to Kaleidoscope, our offerings for adults tend to focus on creating spaces for reflection, for attending to the wisdom within as well as without. These happen in more or less structured ways. The most structured offering is a reflective practice group where members can bring an aspect of their experience, for example, a recent conversation or a recurring pattern in their life, that interaction that I always end up having with my mother or my daughter or, my boss, or a sense, or perhaps it might be just a sense of sensing something that you want to tease out a bit more, but you haven't really had chance to pay attention to. People bring an incident or a theme of their choice and they present it in a kind of structured way to the group. And the aim of the group is not about fixing the problem or giving advice, but helping the person to explore what they've brought with open, honest questions in such a way as to enable the person themselves to move to get more fully in touch with their own knowing and perhaps perhaps to come to a deeper insight or awareness of the dynamic or the possibilities already present in the situation. It's one of the offerings. We also have a spiritual practice group, which enables people to share their own contemplative practices. And so that's where we have learned about some of the wide range of contemplative practice that people engage in and that find nourishing. They teach each other. And we have other groups, an online music and poetry group where people can share those kinds of wisdom. We have a theology reading group. And there are people who come to various of those offerings that have no other connection with Benedictus. And again, I imagine a place like Pitt Street's very familiar with that you offer things and people connect in a whole range of ways. But I guess our question has been not how do we replicate what a parish might normally do, the kind of traditional range of groups that there might be, but always asking that question, what is the particular offering that a contemplative community or a contemplative perspective might offer into the space that complements what other parishes or communities are offering? So not trying to do everything, but to have that sense of our charism is to do with this contemplative dimension. And I guess I would say it's always easy in sharing about Benedictus to share about, oh, we do this and we do this and here's this activity, and that is part of it. But I do sense that more and more just the commitment to the prayer, to the silence and the stillness on a regular basis, holding that space in the ecology of a city makes a difference in ways that you can't just, obviously point to, but that there is something in the ecology of the whole where these holding that space, being tapped into it ourselves and having it available for others to tap into as and when they need is itself quite a significant ministry. So that's the end of that offering. So maybe let's just have 20 seconds or 30 seconds or so just for you to digest that, begin in a tiny way. And then I think we'll move into the breakout rooms. And during the breakout rooms, I've got 2 questions that I invite you to reflect on and to respond to share about with each other. The first one is, what is touching you or drawing you in what I've shared? And the second question is, what are you wondering about? So what is touching you or drawing you? And the second is, what are you wondering about? We do have 20 minutes